camera. So guys, guys, we had a little bit of a technical issue last time. So I'm going to be obviously monitoring the chat and the live. Oops.
That was just a YouTube advert.
That was a YouTube advert. So guys, we're both basically going to be monitoring what's going on in the chat, along with, obviously teaching you guys all your last minute tips for Macbeth, right? So, Mr. Salles, obviously welcome back.
Thank you.
And guys, so obviously what we're going to be going over today is your last minute 24-hour revision for Macbeth, which is obviously part of your upcoming Literature Paper 1 exams, which are going to be on Monday, guys, okay? So obviously what we're going to do is go over exam strategy for this paper, how you should approach the Macbeth question specifically, and also, guys, we're going to go over, what you need to remember in terms of characters. Also, guys, we have heard some rumours in terms of certain characters coming up, which we honestly generally don't think will come up, so we're going to also be addressing that. And also, guys, we will then finish off by talking about quotations and your last minute quotes for Macbeth, okay? And of course, guys, obviously tomorrow, Mr. Salles will not be joining me when I go live, but I will be talking about last minute tips for Christmas Carol at a similar time at 3 p.m. tomorrow, okay? And also finally, guys, in case you missed my literature classes, like my last minute revision classes, which I ran last week and even earlier before, just simply sign up for those classes and literally download those last minute model answers in case you find them helpful for your exams. So let's get started. Macbeth 2025 exams, guys, right? So Mr. Salles, maybe you can get started in terms of when it comes to approaching Macbeth, but also more specifically when it comes to approaching Literature Paper 1 exams. What should students think about in terms of timings, exam strategy, and so on?
Right. So the first thing about exam strategy is to go on the B of bang. You want to go as soon as the exam starts, be ready. How are you going to be ready? Well, you know you're going to get about 52 minutes for each question, and your job is to write as much as you can in those 52 minutes. The more you write, the higher your mark is going to be. I know that sounds really simplistic, but I see it again and again in model answers. Students who write more get higher marks. They don't have to be cleverer.
When you say 52 minutes, can you just clarify why you're talking about 52 minutes and an exam that's 1 hour, 45 minutes long?
Yes, so obviously there's going to be some faff, opening up the exam paper, finding the right question, reading through the extract. So you want to take half the time that's left from the exam, which will be about 52 minutes.
Okay, so 52 minutes for section 8, Macbeth, and then 52 minutes for the second question. Okay.
Exactly. Then you would always read the question first before you read the extract. The extract is likely to lead to a level of anxiety because you're reading Shakespeare, but the question is written in normal English. Highlight the key words because these are the ones you must put in your answer in every paragraph. So that is your most important job. And then how would you approach the extract itself?
Okay, so guys, when it comes to the Macbeth portion of your exams, to be honest, even for Christmas Carol, Jekyll and Hyde, whichever section B question you're going to approach, I have a really specific strategy I always tell my students. In fact, when I did my Macbeth masterclass just this Monday gone, I always say the same thing, even in my previous masterclasses. Always begin in terms of this exam by reading the question first, then the extract. Now, when it comes to actually, after you've read the question, then you've read the extract, how do you answer? How do you structure your response? I always suggest take a very specific framework, which is start with your introduction and your opening thesis statement. This is optional, to be honest. I personally don't think thesis statements are that essential, and you can still get an 8 or a 9 without a thesis statement and without an introduction. However, after you start with an introduction, if you decide to opt for that, make sure you select 2 points from the extract in connection to the question, then 2 points from elsewhere before finishing off your essay. What that means is an ideal model essay and a Macbeth essay would have 2 points from the extract, 2 points from elsewhere in the novel. However, these are not short 4 paragraphs. Those of you guys that joined in my model answers and my Macbeth masterclass will know that I always suggest, guys, you want to go into chunky paragraphs, you want to go into detail, okay? That's my suggestion. How would that differ from your approach?
So I've got two approaches. So for most of you are going to be starting with the extract. And so I'll give you that as a first approach. Totally agree. Find 2 quotes in the extract. If you find more, you can write about more, but really just focus on 2. But what do you do with those 2 quotes? You have to think, okay, I found this quote in the extract. What does that remind me of from early in the play? And then what does that remind me of from later in the play? And so I would have 2 quotes, one from earlier and one from later, that join with the one you found in the extract. The advantage of that is you're able to show the journey of the character or the journey of the theme, and that means you can write an argument. So it's really difficult not to get a grade 7 if you take that approach. In total, that would give you a minimum of 6 quotes, because you've got 2 from the extract and 2 for each of those quotes in the extract. Again, always going back to early in the play and then later in the play, so you can show that development. This means that the paragraphs that I tend to write, they're 80 to 100 words long. That's all they are. You'll have more paragraphs. And you would start with a thesis statement. Now, you're absolutely spot on. You can get a grade 8 and 9 without it. However, the thesis statement introduces 2 or 3 ideas that the author has, and then those 3 ideas end up being your essay plan. So you don't have to spend ages planning the essay. If you write about the author's ideas, again, it's hard not to get at least a grade 7, and that's why I always write a thesis statement.
Okay, so you're basically saying that the thesis statement is you showing the examiner you understand, and you're kind of prefacing and guiding them as to what you're going to go into in your essays.
Yeah, but not just guiding what I'm going to go into, it's which of Shakespeare's ideas I'm going into.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
And then if I've got 3 ideas, then my quotes will relate back to those 3 ideas.
Mm-hmm. Is that the only way students can approach an exam like this? Or can they
No, so if I were doing the exam, I wouldn't start with the extract. The examiners only ask you to start with the extract so you can start quoting. It's for students who haven't done any revision, right? But in the mark scheme, there's nothing about starting with the extract. And the only law of the exam is that you must write something about the extract.
Mm-hmm.
So the easiest way to build an argument, of course, is to follow the character or the theme through the text. So you'd follow them chronologically and then slip the extract in where it happens chronologically in that sequence. That really makes it much easier for you to write super fast, because you don't have to think, oh, what does this quote remind me of? Because you remember the story much more quickly, and you'll remember the quotes much more quickly than having to jump from the extract out to the rest of the text.
Okay, so chronologically can also work for students, especially who find it easier to, when they're thinking about the plot, they don't just work through the plot as they connect it to the question.
Yeah, it's got to only be connected to the question. So typically, that's a grade 7 to 9 technique, and I see that a lot in the example answers, students writing chronologically instead of starting from the extract.
Okay, guys, I'm going to just quickly check if the chat is working and if obviously everything is okay technically speaking. I'm just going to quickly check. Okay, perfect. So guys, right, so carrying on. I'm just doing this because I remember our live stream, our previous live stream, when there wasn't any sound. Anyway, guys, so hopefully it's clear in terms of exam strategy. And guys, what we're going to try and do is also make sure we finish with about 10 minutes before 4 p.m. when we do have to finish off. To just answer any questions very quickly, okay? So, now when it comes to Macbeth specifically, right, we now know how to approach the actual exam that you're going to be sitting at 9 a.m. on Monday. So, with Macbeth specifically, how should students approach this play when it comes to revising for characters? Because obviously, the question that you guys get will either be a character-focused question or a theme question. How should they approach it?
So we've highlighted the main characters for you. Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, and the witches as a group. And then we've given you the minor characters with this important health warning. So this is the rumour that you were talking about, isn't it? Do you want to talk us through the rumour?
Okay, so guys, I have been hearing through the student rumour mill, right? Maybe I could be wrong, but some people are saying that Macduff could potentially come up, or Banquo, or even, for example, I know for Edexcel people always say, oh, there's a past question where the porter came up. What if we get a porter question? Guys, I would like to really recommend, we literally have 24 hours now, or just over 24 hours to your Macbeth exams. Please don't waste your time studying and preparing for minor characters, okay? Remember, if you get a character question, you will always only get one of the main characters. Remember, guys, that AQA, Edexcel, your exam board is not trying to catch you out. They don't want to find ways to fail you, okay? So they're not going to ask you a minor character like Macduff, like King Duncan, like Banquo. What you can get is, say, an extract, something to do with Macbeth, when he's confronted by Macduff, for instance, right? Or, for example, with the 2018 paper, how Macbeth and Banquo's attitudes towards the supernatural are presented, right? But you're never going to get, like, a Macduff-focused question, or a Banquo-focused question, or a Duncan-focused question. Remember, guys, that the examiners in your exam board do not want you guys to fail, okay? So they're not trying to figure out ways to catch you out, okay? You're only ever going to get, if you get a character question, the main characters. And who are the main characters?
So we're going with Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, and the witches. How do you want to divide these up? Shall I do 3 ideas about Macbeth, and you do 3 about Lady Macbeth? Okay, so if I'm writing about Macbeth, the high grades are for Dickens, Shakespeare's ideas. So what are the main ideas? Well, Macbeth has to be a tragic hero. So first, he has to start off as a really noble character so that we can see the arc and his decline. So that's important about the description of him in battle, defeating the Norwegians, because he is a tragic hero. Then we can start writing about his hamartia, his fatal flaw. You can choose what that is. Most teachers teach that it is ambition. And so that is the second point about him. What is his fatal flaw? And link that to Shakespeare's purpose, which is to write a cautionary tale to stop the nobles rebelling against King James. So he's really saying, if you're thinking about becoming king yourself, that is your fatal flaw, and you too will be a tragic hero who fails just like Macbeth does. And then the third thing is he wants to create a psychological portrait where Macbeth feels like a real person who's being acted on by the supernatural, which is why we see the decline in his mental state. Because Shakespeare is bringing us a Christian message and saying that any idea of trying to improve your station in life through violence is actually the devil's work. It's Satan working through you, and you should avoid your own ambition. So those are my 3 Macbeth ideas.
On Macbeth. And incidentally, if you guys have watched our prediction video on Macbeth, I actually predict that the character question will be Macbeth for this year. So I'm going to be a little bit conservative and think that those Macbeth points are going to be super useful for you if my prediction comes up. Now, of course, the other main character, guys, is to do with Lady Macbeth's character, okay? So, of course, guys, remember, you need to be clued up with Lady Macbeth. She was the character question that came up last year, right? Meaning, of course, you can always bank on either getting a question on Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. Now, when it comes to Lady Macbeth's character, and I was actually talking about this in my previous masterclass where I went over a model response for the 2024 Macbeth question, right? Especially on Lady Macbeth's character. In terms of her character, when you're writing about her, always talk about, number 1, how she, in her relationship with her husband, inverts Jacobean society's expectations of women, and their role in their marriage is inverted. In other words, she's the one that displays more dominant masculine traits, right? She's the one that has the ambition initially. She's the one that orchestrates and really plots the murder of King Duncan, even manipulating her husband, whilst Macbeth is the one in their relationship who is portrayed as displaying more feminine traits, more submissive traits, okay? So what's really interesting is you want to always mention, especially when you're talking about Lady Macbeth's character, how she is presented as exhibiting these masculine traits, okay? So that's a really important point. Now, also in terms of Lady Macbeth's character, you want to always make sure in any essay that you write, you juxtapose how she is shown at the beginning versus how she is shown as being punished for this ambition at the end in Act 5, Scene 1, where she has supernatural hallucinations and sees spots of blood on her hands. Talk about how, the hallucinations, the guilt that she feels, this is divine punishment upon her because of her ambition, because of going against her nature as a woman, okay? And also another point you can talk about with Lady Macbeth's character is it's really interesting how she, much like the witches, are portrayed as kind of these fatal characters, right? Kind of like, and I think you've mentioned this in the past, how she's almost presented kind of like Eve and Adam, right, in the Garden of Eden. And the original sin that Macbeth commits, which is killing King Duncan, committing regicide, is as a result of her influence on him, right? So you want to talk about those points with Lady Macbeth's character.
Brilliant, yeah, definitely. I love that.
Yeah. How about the witches?
So,
Say witches comes up.
The witches are easy because you all know that King James had written this book, Demonology, that he was fascinated by witchcraft, and he feared that witches had attempted to assassinate him when he was in Scotland. So he 100% believed that the witches could control events. But Shakespeare takes this idea and gives it in the play in order to flatter King James, to play to his interest, because King James is his patron, which means King James is basically paying Shakespeare to write plays for him and put them on in James's palace. Yeah, this isn't put on at the Globe, it's put on in front of the nobles. Now, Shakespeare does something quite subtle, so he introduces the witches so that we can interpret them as controlling Macbeth, controlling the weather, controlling the future. But also, we can assume that they don't do any of that. All they do is foretell the future. And they only ever tell Macbeth what is going to happen. And if he doesn't have this hamartia, he doesn't have this ambition, he doesn't have this desire to get to his fate much more quickly, then he might have succeeded. And the witches never tell him to do anything, they never make him do anything. That evil is all in Macbeth. And so I love the quote when he goes back to the witches and they say, something wicked by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. That's not the witches, it's Macbeth. So Macbeth, the witches are there to show that Macbeth is even more evil than they are. And then the third point about the witches, which I love, is they aren't punished at the end of the play. They just disappear. They got away with it. It's Macbeth and Lady Macbeth who are punished, but not them. And so the power of the witches lives on, which I guess is a message to Jacobean society. Beware. The witches, the forces of evil, they're out to manipulate you.
Okay, so one of the things that has just occurred to me is when we've been talking about Macbeth, Lady Macbeth and the witches, we've been weaving in context without mentioning it explicitly.
Yes.
And so guys, obviously for some of you guys who maybe have picked up on keywords that we've used like Jacobean society and so on, remember any discussion that you do in Macbeth, especially if you want to get at least a 6, 7, 8 or 9, has to not only show an awareness and understanding of these characters, but you need to also talk about what ideas was Shakespeare influenced by contextually at the time. So very briefly, in terms of Macbeth, Lady Macbeth and the Witches context, what would you say are the top 3 or top 5 context points that can really work with any of these characters?
So obviously you've got King James's demonology and his interest in the witches. You've got the idea that King James popularised the divine right of kings, the idea that God chose the king and therefore the king represented God on earth, and so killing a king wasn't just murder, it was attacking God himself. Then you've got this other idea of the great chain of being, and the great chain of being basically said we've all got our status in society and we're not allowed to change it. And this is some sophisticated context, but Shakespeare has completely changed his status in society, and yet he's having to write a play in which anyone who tries to change their status gets killed.
Yeah.
And so I love the tension between that. So I think he sympathises with Macbeth, even though he has to present him as a villain who fails. So that's 3. Have you got some more that you'd add?
Yeah, I was gonna add to what you've said, guys. One of the things that students tend to ask me, and again, when I was doing my Macbeth masterclass on Monday, they were saying, wait, but hang on, isn't ambition a good thing in our society today? Yes, today it's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Starting at one point and then ending at a different point. In fact, Americans call it achieving the American dream. Now, what you said is really interesting, right? Shakespeare himself, didn't start off rich and then became incredibly rich through his work. However, remember that the idea he wants to reinforce in Macbeth is having any form of ambition is actually quite corrupting, because it not only destabilizes the social order, and it is a social order that exists at the time, which was influenced by the feudal system. And the whole idea of this play was to keep everything exactly as it is. So remember, guys, in terms of context, always remember that ambition is always seen as a really terrible thing in Jacobean society. Not today, not in a modern society. Of course, if you want to add the alternative interpretations, as Mr. Salles has mentioned, you can then talk about actually conversely, today as a modern audience, could we maybe feel some empathy, some form of sympathy towards Macbeth, who actually is just an ambitious character who wanted to rise above his social station, right? If you wanted to add an alternative interpretation. However, if you don't, and you want to go just for the more straightforward, easier context, remember that ambition was always seen as something that would disrupt the rigid hierarchy that existed during Shakespeare's time, okay? So remember that you want to always tie that those points together, okay? So divine right of kings. Obviously, Mr. Salles is also talking about supernatural. It's a really terrible thing. It's not like Harry Potter today, again, where we see like witches and wizards in a really positive way. It was always seen as something that would deliberately lead to your downfall.
Brilliant.
Okay?
So, time for the main themes.
I was actually going to ask.
Oh, go for it.
Which of the characters will never come up?
Ah, right. So, on their own, Macduff and Duncan will never come up, and Banquo will only ever come up as a comparison to Macbeth. There is, if we're talking about rumours, the question that most students dread every year is a question on kingship.
Okay.
And if you ever did get kingship, then you go, oh great, well I could use Duncan, but you don't have to know any quotes.
Yeah.
So interestingly, the mark scheme never has the word quote or quotation in it, it just has the word references. So even if you did get a question on kingship, you wouldn't have to remember any quotes from those characters, you would just have to refer to things they do or say.
But does that mean that students don't have to quote?
No, it doesn't. Well, actually, the real answer is yes, it does. They do not have to quote. However, if you're going to get your AO2 language analysis in, you've got to quote, haven't you? But in theory, the exam board will say, we will just treat it as a paraphrase, we don't care. In reality, whenever you read top grade essays from 6 and above, they're all full of quotes.
Yeah, so guys, always make sure you are quoting. Okay.
Yeah, so 100% quote.
Right, so themes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to start with ambition?
Yeah, so guys, obviously, in terms of themes that you should anticipate coming up, and also, by the way, guys, if you get a character question, you still need to talk about themes, because themes are always tied to Shakespeare's message, Shakespeare's ideas, okay? So make sure, even if you get a character question, don't just keep it to just these characters, oh, they're shown as this, they're shown as that. Talk about also themes, because they're tied to Shakespeare's message. Of course, the main theme is to do with ambition, okay? And of course, remember that the whole play is a message against the corrupting influence of ambition. Shakespeare uses Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's characters to show and to present them as cautionary characters. In other words, they are shown to be punished for their ambition. They face divine punishment, okay? And of course, with ambition, you can go to town with this type of question. In fact, to be honest, I think if ambition comes up for this year's exams, I would say it's a gift, right? Because you can talk about how Macbeth is shown as corrupted by his ambition to be king. Lady Macbeth is shown at the beginning, based on what I've just talked about with Lady Macbeth's character, as corrupted and even bloodthirsty as a result of her ambition. But also, if you talk about ambition, talk about how they are also, they develop paranoia but also guilt, and this is shown through the supernatural hallucinations. Macbeth sees the floating dagger, he sees Banquo's ghost, and of course Lady Macbeth hallucinates in Act 5, Scene 1, and she sees the spots of blood on her hands. Remember, Shakespeare's central message is ambition is corrupting. Do not be ambitious. Not only will it lead to your downfall, but also it's going to affect the country that you belong to.
Brilliant.
Okay.
So let's get into the supernatural. You already know about demonology, you know about flattering King James, but let's think of these 3 witches. Who are they? Well, they are women with beards in a patriarchal society where basically as a woman you got on in life through marriage, they're excluded from that. So these are women who desperately want power and influence, but they can't get it because they're ugly and presumably poor. And so this gives us a psychological reason why they would turn to evil. What is that though? Again, it's their ambition, isn't it, that's leading them to become witches. And then you've got this discussion as to whether their power is real. how much do they control Macbeth versus how much does he do it himself? And there isn't a right answer to that, but discussing that, have two views about it and decide which one you prefer will always get you into the top grades. Obviously, you've got that encounter with Macbeth where he immediately starts thinking of killing Duncan, even when he's got this great news that he's going to become king. Like, they never say to him, you've got to kill the king. It's not even mentioned. That's all his idea. Then, of course, you refer to it, he sees the ghost of Banquo. I love this element of the supernatural because this is Banquo's revenge. When Banquo appears as a ghost, Macbeth says, never shake thy gory locks at me. All the other nobles think, he must be talking about Duncan. They don't know Banquo's just been murdered, that they do know about Duncan, and so they immediately see that he is the person who has killed Duncan, even though that's not what he's saying, that's what they think. And so the supernatural has now controlled him. They've let everybody else know that Macbeth is the murderer. And from that moment, he can't succeed. And then we've got the links between the supernatural and Lady Macbeth. When she calls upon you murdering ministers, she is asking for supernatural help to kill Duncan. And that's why she's punished. That's possibly why Shakespeare kills her off first before Macbeth is punished, because her sin is worse. She goes out and seeks supernatural influence to help her to become a murderer. And then, if we go back to what I said earlier, the supernatural is not punished. They still get away with it at the end, and that acts as that cautionary tale again. Beware of your own ambition, your own capacity for evil, because people like the witches are still out there trying to influence you.
Okay, so the other theme is to do with the theme of guilt. Okay, so the theme of guilt could potentially be a question that you guys get in your exams on Monday. How could you write about the theme of guilt? Guys, remember, when it comes to the theme of guilt, go beyond just saying, Macbeth becomes really ambitious because he listens to the witches and he feels so bad and so guilty at the end. Don't say that. Don't say, Lady Macbeth feels really guilty about causing Macbeth to kill King Duncan and she feels really guilty. That's not what the question is asking. If you are asked any question to do with guilt, number one, always remember that guilt is shown and portrayed and presented as divine punishment that torments Macbeth and Lady Macbeth for their ambition. And specifically, when you talk about guilt, for this kind of question, always talk about the supernatural hallucinations. Remember that the supernatural hallucinations are always used as symbols of guilt. In other words, guys, in any essay on guilt, if you get a question on guilt and this theme, talk about how in Macbeth, his guilt is portrayed, and we can see his sense of anguish, his sense of torment as a result of his ambition. When he first hallucinates, sees the spots of the floating dagger. Equally, his guilt and his sense of torment is also shown, and his rising paranoia once he sees the ghost of Banquo, again, a result of his ambition. And finally, of course, with any kind of question like this, remember that you want to talk about how Lady Macbeth's guilt is portrayed through her supernatural hallucination. Equally, remember, if you get a question on the theme of guilt, talk about how, whilst this guilt that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth feel as a result of their ambition manifests itself in them, Macbeth turns this guilt outwards and goes on this killing spree. Lady Macbeth turns this guilt internally and ends up committing suicide. Okay, so that would be the points you can consider with guilt. Please, guys, if you get a guilt question or anything to do with any of the hallucinations, they're not only symbols of guilt, but please move beyond talking about, oh, Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, they feel really guilty, they feel really bad, because that's going to just keep you getting stuck at grade 4 level, okay? If you want to try and get 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, you have to talk about these alternative points. How about appearances and reality?
So this is my least favourite theme, because I don't think it will ever come up. However, appearance and reality brings us to the opening of the play, Fair is foul and foul is fair. And the whole point of that is nothing is as it seems. And that starts the whole play off. We've got Duncan saying about reading the mind's character in the face, and he can't do it, which is why he is deceived by the original Thane of Cawdor. And then, of course, Macbeth seems like this wonderfully noble character, but then he becomes Thane of Cawdor, also a traitor. And the whole point of that is that in political life, everything is uncertain. Why is Shakespeare doing that? Well, because that's what political life is like at the time in Jacobean England. People are really worried about, are the Catholics going to come back? Are the Protestants going to stay? Is James going to be the rightful king, or is someone going to try and depose him? And so the idea of appearance and reality is really telling us about political uncertainty and how people felt super anxious at the time. So what happens at the end is we get reality returns. So order is restored, there is a rightful king, Malcolm, who gets restored, everything's going to be fine in Scotland. But is it? Because the witches told us that Fleance is going to become king. Fleance is not related to Malcolm in any way. So how is that going to happen? So even at the end of the play, Shakespeare ends with this tension that feels like a wonderful happy ending, but actually, what is the true reality? This, I guess, the easiest thing that is like a clickbait thumbnail that gets people to click and watch, and that's what Shakespeare's doing at the end of the play. Do you feel safe now? But are you?
Okay, and the other theme is to do with the theme of fate and free will. Remember that this whole play is trying to show how Macbeth and Lady Macbeth try to go against their fate, their social position in the great chain of being. By rising, so in Macbeth's case, he tries to rise above being a thane to becoming king, and Lady Macbeth, not only does she try to go against her fate as a woman when she asks the spirits to unsex her, right? But she also tries to go against her fate as just the wife of a thane to becoming Queen of Scotland. Now, of course, remember that, again, going back to Shakespeare's message, and by the way, guys, all of these points are kind of, I believe, intrinsically related to ambition. Even if you get character questions, by the way, guys, you always find yourself circling back to ambition. And I'm saying this because when it comes to the idea and the theme of fate and free will, remember that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth attempt to gain power and go against the chosen representative of God, and they also, especially in Macbeth's case, try to control the outcome by seeking the witches, by seeking their prophecies in order to go against the fate which God had decreed for them. And of course, ultimately, what is Shakespeare's message with this theme? Well, if you go against your fate and try to exercise your free will, you're not only going to be punished, you're also going to probably face hell and eternal damnation as a result of that, okay? And of course, with any kind of question on fate and free will, you want to talk about Macbeth and all his actions going against divine right of kings and so on. Obviously, Lady Macbeth, but also with the fate and free will question, you can also potentially link it to either Macduff or Banquo's characters who never try to exercise any form of free will. Banquo is told, your kids will be kings, and he doesn't act on it. He's just like, okay, I'm just going to let, fate take its course. If my kids are going to be kings, I'm not going to do anything about it. Same to Macduff. I think what's really interesting about Macduff's character is he kills the king, King Macbeth, but then hands the crown back over to Malcolm. He never tries to exercise any form of free will, any form of ambition, or he doesn't even manifest any ambition in trying to become king. He's not like, oh, I've killed King Macbeth, now I can be king. He actually then lets fate take its course, okay? He then hands the crown back over to Malcolm, okay? And I kind of had a thought, if somebody is looking at this and watching this video, and they're like, okay, this is really useful and helpful, how can I maybe revise? What's the most efficient revision strategy? Should I read a model answer? Should I read Mr. Salazar's guide? What's the best way to synthesize all of this if I need something to read?
Right. So there's the money-making answer. So you should go to our websites and download the right resource. But there's also a ChatGPT answer.
Ooh.
If you go underneath the video and find the transcript, which will then pop up at the side of the video, copy and paste that into ChatGPT and ask it to summarize each of the sections that we've done, to give you headings, and then revise those.
Okay.
So you would, in a way, you would watch the video again by reading it and then summarising it, and then get someone to test you on the notes that you've taken, and then you'll be sorted by Monday.
Okay. There you go, guys. Okay, so you can either go for his revision guides, my model answers, or ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So, quotes.
Yes, the quotes. So obviously you could have a million quotes, and I know I panicked you by saying you actually don't need loads of quotes. You know, you can get away without it. Having said that, grade 9 essays typically have about 13. Grade 7 essays typically have 10. And we've got 8 for you here. There'll be loads more in the extract, so you can easily hit those figures. So we're going to start with vaulting ambition. Obviously, we talked about ambition so much, and this is a must. I said that this is what most English teachers teach, as is hamartia. That proves it, doesn't it? The rest of the quote is, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but vaulting ambition, which falls on the other. And when you get the whole quote, you can argue, if you want to, this is my interpretation, that he knows ambition is going to fall on the other side, and in order to make the ambition work, he can't just kill Duncan, he needs the spur. And for me, that's Lady Macbeth. That's why he gets her involved in the plot. He writes the letter to her telling her about the witch's prophecies because he wants her help to make this plot work. And the reason I love that is it does work. The only time it goes wrong is when Macbeth decides to kill Banquo and then sees Banquo's ghost. If he hadn't seen Banquo's ghost, the nobles wouldn't have turned against him. And so this plan of the spur of Lady Macbeth would have succeeded.
Okay. So obviously the next quotation, guys, if you forget everything, is obviously the infamous Lady Macbeth quote, unsex me here. I think obviously this quotation not only ties to Lady Macbeth's character, how she goes against her nature as a woman, how she sees also her femininity as very restrictive, but equally, of course, this ties into the theme of the supernatural, where she calls on the spirits in order to change the great chain of being, the natural order that is there in order to attain power. Okay, so unsex me is really useful not only for a Lady Macbeth quotation, it also shows the theme of ambition and the theme of the supernatural, and you can even argue the theme of guilt, because we can see that her guilt results from her wanting to go against her nature as a woman. So, the third quotation, which I quite like, is another Lady Macbeth question.
Do you want to do it then? You can do it.
Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. I think what's really interesting with this quotation, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it, this is what Lady Macbeth says to Macbeth when she is advising him how to deceive King Duncan once he visits his castle and then eventually kill him. I think what's really interesting is, firstly, it's underlining Lady Macbeth's corrupt and manipulative nature. Equally, remember, especially tied to the theme of appearances and reality, Shakespeare wanted to use this theme to warn his audience, his viewers, against trusting things based on appearance. Now, of course, King Duncan highlights the opposite side of this, and his fatal flaw is trusting appearances too much, okay? Which Lady Macbeth, when she says this quotation, uses this, and someone like King Duncan is deceived by her outward appearance. Remember that King Duncan says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. I find it really hard to tell how people are in terms of the nature by just looking at their face. Lady Macbeth deliberately manipulates this, okay? So remember with the quotation, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. It shows Lady Macbeth's manipulative nature. It equally demonstrates Shakespeare's message, especially in connection to appearances and reality, the theme that whoever trusts appearances, they always tend to meet their untimely deaths. However, those that question appearances, they are the ones who are able to see through the deception of people like Lady Macbeth. But of course, obviously, Lady Macbeth is also ultimately punished for this, okay? So I would say you can talk about all of those points with look like the innocent flower, be the serpent under it.
It's brilliant, and it also links to the theme of the Garden of Eden that you introduced earlier. The serpent is Satan in that story, and tempting Eve towards evil, and Lady Macbeth is now tempting Macbeth towards evil. Do you want to do the medallion bit from the gunpowder plot?
You can, and let me just quickly check if the chat is still working, just in case that there's any issue.
So while you're checking, the medallion is a coin that was issued after the failure of the gunpowder plot. So the Catholics had been defeated, and to commemorate James's survival, he issued a coin with the picture of a flower and a serpent underneath it. So this is another way that Shakespeare is flattering King James.
Yes. So, next quotation, never shake that gory locks.
Ah, yes, so I love this one. So I've told you already, when he says these words, whether he's just hallucinating it or whether this is a real ghost, it tells us that Macbeth has lost the court. He's lost all the thanes, the nobles, because they know, never shake thy gory locks at me, they know the person who's been killed is Duncan. Even though they're wrong, he's talking about Banquo, they are now convinced that he is confessing to murdering the king. And that's the moment that they all turn against him. It is, as well, divine punishment. So we got this idea that perhaps God is also using the supernatural through Banquo. Now, why is that important? Because Banquo was believed to be an ancestor of King James. So portraying Banquo as someone supported by God makes King James supported by God. So this is Banquo's revenge. He doesn't even have to say any words, but he causes Macbeth to lose the prize of kingship.
Okay, so the two quotations here related to the witches, right? I'd suggested Ferris fell, but then you mentioned whose horrid image doth unfix my hair. So I'm going to explain why I really like Ferris fell if you decided to go for a witch question, in case you get a witch question in your exams or supernatural. And then perhaps you could also talk about why you wanted to mention and suggest the reference to how Macbeth is talking about the witches whose horrid image doth unfix my hair. Guys, if you get any questions to do the witches or the supernatural, I think Ferris fell and Fowl's Fair is a super easy quotations to remember, but also to write about, right? Because of course, remember that the witches are speaking in oxymorons. They are speaking, also, if you ever write about the witches, if a witches question comes up, they are speaking in equivocations, they're speaking in riddles. And what they're saying here is they are going to be turning good into bad. Bad is good and good is bad, right? So, or rather, Ferris fell, good is bad and bad is good, right? They are foreshadowing, changing and reversing the natural order, okay? And remember, guys, if you get a question on the supernatural, the witches, or you decide to talk about the witches, if you have an opportunity, for any of the theme questions, always remember that the play starts with them because Shakespeare wants to firmly establish in our minds that they are agents of chaos. They are going to reverse the natural order of things, which is exactly what they do. Now, you had a slightly different opinion in terms of witches quotations, and this is the whose horrid image doth unfix my hair.
So when Macbeth says this, the horrid image that doth unfix my hair, it's the image of killing Duncan. And he's asking himself, why am I seeing that? Because the witches have just told me these great things, that I'm going to be Thane of Cawdor and that I'm going to be king. These are wonderful things, so why is my mind turning immediately to murder? And the reason I love that is it's not necessarily the witches that are making his mind turn. He's looking at himself and thinking, what is it about me? And should I be on guard against myself? This is a wonderful moment when he could have pulled back. Like Banquo, as you said, he never tries to go towards that fate. He just lets fate happen. But Macbeth won't let fate happen. He deliberately thinks, like, how can I get this now? I'm going to murder Duncan. And I actually use this as part of my argument to say it's not just Hamartia that's his it's not just ambition that's his Hamartia, it's also his bloodlust. He falls in love with killing.
Okay.
And that's what his total downfall is. But you don't have to argue that at all, that's just me.
Okay. So Outdam Spot, obviously guys, I think Outdam Spot, which is a really nice contrast to On Sex Me Here. Here we can see Lady Macbeth's ambition being coming to full circle, right? We can see her facing divine punishment, seeing the spots of blood on her hands, hallucinating and experiencing guilt. I think all the points that I've made relating to Lady Macbeth and also the theme of guilt are really nicely captured in the Outdam Spot quotation. So for example, guys, if you do get another Lady Macbeth question this year, or some opportunity to write about Lady Macbeth, say if you get a theme question, always use Outdam Spot and juxtapose how she is shown as highly ambitious, willing to do anything to gain power when she says, "Unsex me here," versus her supernatural hallucination being divine punishment for her actions.
Yeah, and I love the fact that it's just one spot that still leads to her killing herself. And you talked about Macbeth's way of coping with his guilt is just to go and kill everybody, and his hands are covered in blood, and then he kind of stops feeling guilty. So life is in some ways much crueler to Lady Macbeth. And do you think she's punished more because she's a woman?
Definitely she's punished more because she's a woman. Guys, remember that, of course, this play was written in a very patriarchal society, a society controlled by men. And I think Lady Macbeth especially, I mean, to be honest, the only murder she really orchestrates is the king. Banquo, it's Macbeth that does that. Then he goes on and has Macduff's family killed. Then he's just on this killing rampage because there's all these wars, right? But yet it was just that one murder, and she is disproportionately punished, and she can't even live with herself, that she then even commits suicide, right? So of course, this was a play that was written in a deeply patriarchal society, and hence I would say Lady Macbeth is especially punished for being a woman.
Me too, I agree.
Life is but
a walking shadow. So that whole speech, we could have picked any line almost.
Yeah.
Because this is when Macbeth finally realises that all his plans have been for nothing. And everything that he thought was going to be a joy has now turned to dust. He can't enjoy any of it. And this is a brilliant metaphor. So life for him is nothing to enjoy, it's just a shadow. A good life is somewhere else in the sunshine, but the life that he's had as a king is in darkness. Obviously, it's his own darkness. He's brought his own evil towards being king, and that's what's ruined it. But I also love the word shadow because this was a joke with the audience. The shadow is the understudy, the person who plays a role when the main character's ill or doing something else. So Shakespeare is now saying, I tried to have the main part, being the king, but I was really only ever the understudy. I didn't deserve to be where I am. And so he's realised now that he was the wrong person to be king. But even that makes him think life is completely pointless. And this is when he starts to feel nihilistic. Nihilism means that you don't think there's any point in life. And that is the ultimate divine punishment. So he can't even enjoy living. And then obviously he's going to go to hell. He's not going to enjoy death either. Okay, and the final quotation before obviously guys we answer your final questions, and just looking at the time, we do have 10 minutes. We're doing well. Then. So we're doing quite well for timing. So guys, the final quotation, which obviously if you are thinking and scrambling for last minute Macbeth quotations, would be how both he and Lady Macbeth, who are now dead right at the end of the play, Malcolm talks about him being a dead butcher and his wife being fiend-like. A fiend is a devilish creature, right? So this reference to Macbeth, dead butcher, and Lady Macbeth, fiend-like queen. The quote being dead butcher and fiend-like queen. What this is demonstrating is the consequences of ambition. How we can see that this tragedy is complete. We can see here that this really noble character, Macbeth, and his wife have now been reduced to cautionary characters because of their ambition. Brilliant. And it's like the great chain of being as well. They've dropped off it, haven't they?
Yeah.
So he's no longer got any status and she's not even human.
Yeah, and they're now in hell, right?
Yes.
Which is at the bottom of the great chain of being, right? So guys, obviously, if you want to see how this looks like in a model response, of course, or you follow the ChatGPT option, obviously guys, don't forget, I've put in the description box the links that you can follow to download the model answers that I've written for the Macbeth questions. Okay, so of course guys, if you have any questions or you want to see these model answers, just click on those description links. Now guys, I'm going to check the chat and see if you guys have any final questions, which I'm obviously going to be directing to you, and I'm also going to be addressing these questions before wrapping up at 4 p.m. because Mr. Salles has a play, a very exciting play that he's going to be watching, okay? Whilst you guys are going to be stuck at home studying, he's going to be having a great time watching a play.
Yeah, the benefits of age.
So guys, I'm just looking at the questions. Are you going to do Romeo and Juliet? Probably not, guys. But for those of you guys that literally just want to see Romeo and Juliet model answers, just click on the description link and you're going to see like one of my previous model answers there, okay? For Romeo and Juliet, or Jekyll and Hyde, or any of the other ones, guys, okay? Right, okay, guys, this... so let's see, guys. Okay, they're way too many. Wait, what are the predictions, guys? Okay, so the comments are just going a little bit crazy. Guys, we have already talked about predictions in our predictions video in Macbeth. My prediction was Macbeth.
Mine was guilt.
Was it guilt?
I think.
Yeah, I want to say it's guilt. But I do distinctly remember I want to be a little bit conservative this year. I think we're going to have a Macbeth question, okay? And you believe it's going to be guilt.
Well, when you say believe, that's
think.
With my model answer of guilt, you can use it to answer a Macbeth question as well. So that's how I've structured it. So if you prepared Guilt, you would also prepare Macbeth. You would also prepare Lady Macbeth. So with one prediction, you'd cover 2 characters and 1 theme.
Okay, right, so guys, we're going to quickly check and just see. Oh my god. What are the possible... Oh my gosh, okay, let me just try and slow this down. Do you need a thesis? Guys, you don't need a thesis. Mr. Sally's likes one, but I would say that it's not. Mr. Sally's, is your grade 9 sensible and actually worthy? I would say yes, Mr. Sally's grade 9 response is definitely sensible.
What a question!
Inspector calls. Guys, we're not looking at literature paper 2 today. Do you think Macbeth and Macduff will come up or a relationship? There's no relationship between Macbeth and Macduff. You could get a extract which has Macbeth and Macduff shown, but you're not going to get a question about either Macduff's character or even the relationship between Macbeth and Macduff. They don't have a relationship.
No, you wouldn't.
There is the only time we see Macbeth and Macduff in the same scene is the final showdown, and this is showing Macbeth being punished and facing his punishment, and also him realizing that he's been misled by the witches when they told him no man born of woman shall ever harm Macbeth, and then he realizes, oh, that means this guy was born of a C-section, so I was deceived, and that's it. But you're not going to get a Macbeth and Macduff relationship question, and definitely not a Macduff question, okay? Yeah. So, what about supernatural soliciting? Guys, you can definitely get a supernatural question. Right, hang on. So, let's see. Can I use Macbeth was a play? Guys, saying Macbeth is a play is not context, okay? Simply saying that Macbeth was a play is not context. Mr. Sally's, what does context mean?
Yeah, so context means this. What about the time do you need to tell me in order to persuade me of your point of view about the character or theme? Yeah, so you'd only ever bring in stuff about the time to prove your point of view about any of the characters or any of the themes. If it doesn't do that, it's just pointless words on a page. Yeah. And the examiners will just ignore it.
Okay, so guys, remember context is what was happening at Shakespeare's time that influenced him. This being a play was not happening at his time, okay? This is just the genre he used to stage this story, okay? Right, guys, so we have 5 minutes. I'm going to see what the chat is kind of moving. If the question is on a specific character and I talk about themes and other characters, is that considered off topic? Okay, so if a question is on characters, right? Yes. So if there's a Macbeth question, Lady Macbeth, is it going off topic if you talk about other characters or themes?
Absolutely not. Yeah, in fact, if you want the top grade, any character question, you're going to immediately try and bring the themes into that character, because the themes are Shakespeare's ideas, and Shakespeare's ideas are where the top marks are. So always write about the themes, especially in a character question, because it's easy to forget. You can just write about the character without thinking about the themes. Always drag them in. What do you think? Yeah,
I would say so. So I would say if it's a character question, stick to that character, make your life easy, but you must absolutely mention themes. In fact, if anything, if you get, for example, a theme question, talk about characters and then tie it back to the theme. If you get a character question, think about all the different themes you could link it back to. Of course, if you get a character question like Macbeth, you can then talk about his relationship with Lady Macbeth, or if you wanted to, for whatever reason, talk about how he and Macduff, meet, or he and Banquo, but it's in connection to that main character, okay? But you're definitely not going off topic by talking about and linking to theme for a character question, okay? And vice versa. For a theme question, make sure you talk about the different characters, okay? And again, guys, literally, we've both done grade 9 model answers, right? So you can either go to the description link I've put in the description box, download those, or you can go onto Mr. Sally's page and download his model answers, or a Substack even.
On my Substack.
On your Substack, okay? So make sure you've got those options if you wanted to see how that looks like in a model response.
And the other bit of that question was, can we talk about another character if it's just about one?
Yeah.
And I always think that's really good, especially if you think about it structurally. So Banquo is there to give us the contrast, the counterpoint to Macbeth. When you're writing about Lady Macbeth, you're always going to talk about how she influences Macbeth and even how he influences her. So as long as you pick a character that influences your character, you will always get a higher grade.
Yeah, so you still need to talk about the interplay between that main character and the other character. You don't just talk about the other character just by themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay, so guys, I'm going to take like maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then that's really it, okay? So Guys, Edexcel guys, all of this information is just as relevant to you guys as AQA, okay? So Edexcel guys, all the stuff that we literally go over is just as relevant to you guys. By the way, I know that there's other exam board guys that see this, OCR, IGCSE, all of the stuff that we go over is just as relevant to your exam boards, okay? So yeah, you can use this information.
So I get asked that question a lot, and Shakespeare's ideas don't change because it's a different exam board, and the quotes don't change. It's all exactly the same.
So there's two questions I want to merge. One of them is what paragraph structure should I use? And the second question is, should I use obscure quotations, okay?
Nice.
So paragraph structure and obscure quotes.
Right.
Guys, in terms of paragraph structures, for any of you guys that have been part of my masterclasses, you will know that I love pill paragraphs. I personally like a pill structure. I love a good pill paragraph, and I think you can still do really well. The reason why I always advocate for pill paragraphs, and of course, guys, if you want to use other different paragraph structures, you can. But the reason why I always advocate for pill is because, guys, in the exam you're saying on Monday, you have so much to think about, right? You've got your main characters, your themes, and so on for Macbeth. But then also, guys, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about Christmas Carol. You've also got to think about the same information but Christmas Carol. Equally, you then need to be able to answer the question. You need to make sure you're using information from the extract. You then need to do a quick brain scan and then think of all those quotations. You're literally having to think about so much. If you now layer in a really super complex paragraph structure with lots of different steps, you're only adding more to your plate, right? And for me, I would suggest that a pill paragraph structure literally has the components that your examiners are looking for, and the most important component being in your explanation. You're developing context, you're talking about Shakespeare's message, you're unpacking the quotation, you're talking about terminology. So it's one less thing to think about, having a very clear 4-step paragraph structure, rather than some of these paragraphs that I see, you know, the different steps are like 12 steps. Obviously, more power to you if you do want to use that long paragraph structure, but in my perspective, I personally feel like you already have so much you're juggling in your exam on Monday, to then layer in some long, complex paragraph structure. I personally am not a massive advocate, but I guess you beg to differ.
So I've got some different views, but also similar. So I completely agree that a complex paragraph structure is just too much to hold on to in the exam. So if I were to write the exam question, so expert writers don't use paragraph structures. However, if you need a paragraph structure, it's because you're not sure what's going to get the marks, and so having a PEEL paragraph structure will really help. I teach PEEP, so it's the PEE are the same, but my P is then write about the author's purpose. All the stuff that we've talked about with the themes, all the context that we've used to try and explain what Shakespeare's ideas are. And the reason I do that is when you write about Shakespeare's purpose, you're always grade 7 and above for that bit of your writing. You don't have to use a paragraph structure, you could just write. So the top grade example answers that AQA publish never follow a paragraph structure. Under exam conditions, kids can't hold on to it for long. I've written a model essay for this question in PEEP paragraph structures. You can find it on my website, mrssallisteachersenglish.com if you're interested. And you can find out what PEEP looks like, or, this is the most important thing, if you've got a paragraph structure that's worked for you in the mocks, keep that, don't change it now.
Okay, and how about picking obscure quotations?
Yeah.
Clever quotations to stand out, right? Not picking what the common folk are going to be using, the common unsex me. Is there any merit or value to picking obscure quotations? So
the easy answer is no, because the examiners aren't looking for way out original ideas. They just want a logical argument that deals with the text. However, if you are really into the text and you know some way out quotes that you can write about
and analyse,
then do put them in, because there is a novelty value. You know, can you imagine an examiner going, oh, essay 589, essay 509, and so if they read something they haven't read before, they're automatically psychologically likely to want to give you more credit. Yeah, and I was actually making the same argument when I created a video on tissue, the model response for tissue. For those of you guys, guys, we're obviously talking about literature paper 1, but we're gonna obviously be talking about literature paper 2 eventually. And I made the same argument for tissue. I first created a video which literally just shows like your perfect essay on tissue, and then I made the argument that, guys, the moment you start using
poems like that, whilst everyone else is using just the same Ozymandias, London, and you are able to show an understanding, and obviously in my video I literally just explain it in really simple English and with quotations. Your examiner, who's marking 50, 60, 70 scripts a day, and then they see Ozymandias 50 times, but then tissue or something different once, that immediately puts you up in top tier category. Your answer stands out. And as long as you're able to bring it home, and maybe you have mid answers, because it's different, psychologically for that examiner, they can see that you have a unique take on the same question that like a bunch of students literally write the same points about. Yeah, so in terms of obscure quotations, it doesn't necessarily like make a massive difference unless you're able to use some really good quotations which you can explain, expand on, and then make some interesting original points, because they definitely can stand up to your examiner.
Agreed.
Okay, right guys, so Mr. Sales has to watch his play. Okay, so we are literally 3 minutes over and I want to make sure that obviously you are in time for your play. But guys, for those of you that have any extra questions, I will be going live, going over last minute tips for Christmas Carol tomorrow at the same time at 3 p.m. Mr. Sales sadly will not be joining in. But if you have any questions, guys, that I haven't gotten around to, just pop them in the chat. For Christmas Carol, and of course, guys, don't forget, as Mr. Sales and I mentioned, if you want anything more, either head over to his Substack, have a look at, the past lessons that he's done. But as I mentioned, guys, you can also just go into the description box where I have literally links to the past issue lessons that I've done with the model answers that you can immediately download and then literally revise from for Macbeth, and of course, Christmas Carol, Jekyll and Hyde, and so on, okay? So, any final parting words, Mr. Sales?
Try to relax, just don't panic, and remember, go on the be a bang. The more you write, the higher mark.
Yes, guys, the more you write. Remember, guys, that you want to the more you write in your essay, you're just giving your examiner more material to award you marks, okay? That's something that, I completely agree. Just write as much as you can. And if you have any extra time, write some more, okay? So just make sure you just write as much as you can, okay? Right, guys, thank you so much for joining in, and we're going to be heading off so that Mr. Sales can make sure he is ready for his play, guys. Guys, thank you so much for joining.